Good morning, friends. We're on our very last day of crystal clarity in the very last segment of this book. So, this is fun. It's been a great series. So, let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence in all that we do, that we will know that we are not living or acting alone in this world, but we are always your instruments. Help us to be perfect instruments, not to get lost in our own thoughts and desires, but to respond always according to your inner guidance. Om, peace. Amen. I laugh. I hear myself say, oh, it's been a great series. I don't actually mean that the series itself, measured against all other series or whatever. I actually meant I have enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great talking about this book. And in actual fact, I picked it up because there's things I needed to understand about money, and I actually think I learned a lot of them. I think I've shifted in the last weeks, last couple of years. But I did know that handling money was a bit of a gap in my spiritual um, quiver, so to speak. And I feel better about it from having gone through all the principles in this book and just sort of put it together. For me, a great series, so to speak, is when I'm learning as I go. That what's happening is that ideas are coming together, and oh, that's how it works, and it really means something to my heart. Otherwise, it's sort of too one-sided. I'm trying to persuade you of something that I'm not dynamically engaged in myself. So that's why I said it was a great series. I just don't want it to be. I didn't want to have a testimonial on my own production. This is a great series. Asha, author, speaker. Instead of getting everybody else to blurb my books, I'll just blurb them myself. So, moving right along, we are in the last sentence, last paragraph, last sentence, and I'm going to read the whole thing from start to finish again. This opportunity to go really deep into crystal clarity has been really helpful to me, because this is one of those things that Swami was so elated about. And I have to say that I appreciated it, but I appreciate it much more now. Now I really understand it is a template for right living. And in his usual way, he puts it so simply that you have to really stop and realize how deep what he's saying is. Crystal clarity means to see oneself and all things as aspects of a greater reality, to seek to enter into conscious attunement with that reality, and to see all things as channels for the expression of that reality. It means to see truth in simplicity, to seek to be guided always by the simple truth, not by opinion, and by what is, not by one's own desires or prejudices. It means striving to see things in relation to their broadest potential. And this is our sentence for today and the end of the paragraphs. In one's association with other people, it means seeking always to include their realities in one's own. It's very important, even though it's the last sentence. It's by no means the least important, because the vast experience of our life is in relationship to other people. The great joys of life often come through our relationships with other people, and much of the greatest suffering comes in our relationships with other people. So to have not a muddy, but a clear thought about what is the key to relationships, to include other people's realities in our own. Swami also uses a very similar phrase in his Education for Life training course. The goal of Education for Life is a educational system for children, but of course the principles are universal and they also apply to us who have big bodies but may not necessarily be grown up yet. Um, the goal of education, Swami says, is true maturity. And true maturity he defines as the ability to include in your reality also the realities of others, to just see, not be limited by the worldview that I live in, but to be able to understand the context in which other people live. A few days ago, I was talking about the PBS special program that is about the Black church, and I was talking about how deeply it affected me just to see up close that wonderful people whom I respect and I admire, both in my people I know in my personal life and the images of well-known figures that were in the documentary, how completely different their upbringing was than mine, and how completely differently they respond to certain influences, and how I respond to certain influences that simply don't touch them. They might admire them as I do, they might enjoy it even, but there's a whole different orientation that comes, in this case, racial, whatever, religious, whatever it is, but it's as true for others as my little story is for me. And it's equally arbitrary in the sense that over many incarnations we experience many different realities, but it's not arbitrary when it's yours and when you're living through it. I remember I was in a situation with someone where I had an idea of what would be helpful for them, and I was trying to persuade them to pay attention to what I thought would be helpful. And somehow or another, they were resisting me. And somehow or another, Swami got involved in the conversation, and I really don't remember how, but he got in the middle of it. And his comment was, I said, don't you think that the advice I'm giving is the right advice? Swami said, yes. It would be very helpful for that person if they could accept what you're saying. He said, but you have to wait until they themselves are ready or interested. The person who resisted me said quite simply, yes, of course that's a good idea, but it's not my priority. That was the phrase. I have other things that seem more important to me at this point, and I'm putting my energy in a different direction. Now, I mean, that's a very simple situation where it's not that you're wrong, it's that we're not tuning in to what really motivates the other person, and we're not seeing that other person the way they feel to themselves. Um, I've titled this segment True Friendship because what we're always looking for in our lives, in our desire to be close with other people, is to do that which really will build between us trust and love and appreciation and a positive flow of energy. And so often with other people, that isn't what we have. We either become alienated from each other, we become angry with each other, become bored with one another, whatever it might be, just because we're trapped in our own perspective and don't know how to get deeply enough into someone else's. Swamiji's gift of friendship to us was just extraordinary on every possible level. He said to me once, sort of jokingly, he said, it's tempting sometimes to wish that this friend had more of the qualities of that one, and that if this one could just be like this. He said, don't, was the word he said. Just don't. You start with where a person is standing. You ask where they're trying to go. I had a difficulty getting along with a certain person for a period of time, and we were working together on a project, and there was always tension between us. And Swamiji just said to me, why don't you try to think of what they are trying to accomplish and see if you can help them accomplish it? And it was such simple advice, but phrased exactly like that. Like, where are they trying to go? Instead of constantly trying to persuade them that they ought to go where I think they should go. Where is that person trying to go? And what can I do that will contribute to the accomplishment of what they themselves feel is a priority in their life to accomplish? And no one in my world has evil intention. They just have other good ideas. and no one should actually abandon what they feel inwardly called to do just because someone else says you should do something else. Swami talked, even the way Master worked was to awaken the inspiration inside of us, how he works now. Let me tell you how Swami put it. There was a book that was published. Nishala did a number of interviews with founding members of Ananda and then wrote up those interviews into a book. She did a beautiful job. She's very skilled as a writer. And she did a wonderful job of keeping the voice as the person, but clarifying, because often that which is extemporaneous and vocal has to be clarified before it can be published as a written document. Wonderful book. Two people in that book. Talking about these big responsibilities that Swami gave them, and just to be humorous, as people do, they made sort of a humorous remark about, he left me on the doorstep and said goodbye and good luck, kind of thing. And the other one said, gave me 2 pieces of paper that had 500 words on it and said, make a life out of those 500 words. Just that was the way. A slight exaggeration, but not much, because in both circumstances, that's what it appeared to be. Swami read the book. He really liked the book. He called both of those people and said, I was always with you. I never left you on your own. He was very emphatic about that. And then later, he described it this way. He says, I work the way Master worked. He said, I project thoughts toward people, to people who I feel would be interested in what I might have to offer. So it's not as if he's using his power on people who haven't invited him. This is how he talked about Master too. When Master said to him, I know every single thought that you think, Swami was thrilled that that was true, because he had invited Master to come in and take charge of his life. And as a consequence, he was comforted to know that Master was listening and paying attention and responding. So Swami said, for those who have asked me, in essence, and have asked me not just with words, but really with their heart, because on other occasions Swami would say, well, so-and-so said they want me to correct them in anything that they might be doing wrong. He said, but I never said anything, because I knew they didn't mean it. They wanted to mean it, but the heart wasn't in it. So for those whose heart was really in it, Swami said, I would project toward them thoughts and ideas that I thought might be helpful to them. And if they wanted to receive those thoughts, and if those thoughts, as he put it, Swami put it, resonated with who they are, if those thoughts resonated with who they are, then they would take them inside. And once the thought came, and one was working with it from inside, he said, then it would become their own self-expression. And many thoughts I know that he projected toward us, toward me, toward many of us, toward me, I would say specifically. I could, they might cross my mind, but they would just glance off because I didn't feel that I could do it. I didn't feel it was a priority. But I learned, this is especially when I was starting here in this community and we were beginning to develop it, there was this flow of ideas. There was this flow of energy. There was this flow of intuition that had a clarity and a certainty that even at the time, it constantly surprised me. And then, of course, gradually I woke up to the fact that Swami was doing it through me. And that was not by any means a diminution of my, quote, self-expression. It was actually elevating my self-expression to right where I wanted it to be, which was to be in tune with a higher vibration, with the highest vibration that I aspired to live by. And that's exactly what it is, that's how we're trying to be friends to each other. We're trying to feel what people want from us and then find the right way and the right manner and the right specific thoughts, to share with them. What are you trying to accomplish? And when in that particular relationship that I was struggling with, I started trying to think. I mean, it's so obvious, but it had to be articulated to me because I was too dense to know it on my own. What are you trying to accomplish? And I'm very creative and very helpful by nature. And when I saw where they were trying to go, then all of a sudden I could start either verbally or just even from my heart, just seeing their success in the way they were trying to have it and make concrete suggestions and add literal energy when it was appropriate and I had it to give to what they were trying to accomplish, not merely what I wanted them to want, to include other people's realities in our own. Now, think about it also, how much we love that when other people take us seriously, don't we? I remember I was only like 20. It was probably when I was 20, and I was just starting out on my own life, and I had a good friend, and I met their good friend. And that good friend knew the art of friendship. And all of a sudden, all of our concerns were his concerns. And I just remember how he used the pronoun us and we to talk about the things that we were trying to accomplish that hadn't included him until then and didn't really include him in a practical way. But all of a sudden, our realities were his realities. This is what you're trying to accomplish. How can I help you? And my gratitude, I still remember, this was now like 50 years ago. I still remember how touched I was by that and how inspiring it was to have someone just take me on. Someone I barely knew, in fact, but just take me on like that. Oh, this is what you need. Let me see how I can give it to you. And of course, if we're in a position where we are able to help move people toward a higher ideal that they're also reaching for, that would be the way to win them to it. I had an interesting experience. I believe yesterday I referred a little bit to my aging parents who have now been in the astral world or wherever they are now for at least 15 years, more than that, I think. Um, but I had a very interesting cycle with them that also was powerfully important in this respect. I don't look forward to hard karmic tests. I'm not as afraid of them as I used to be because I have confidence in myself. I realize I'm not going to get drawn off the path, and I don't want to be arrogant here, but I don't feel that I'm going to be drawn off the path. And I'm not afraid of having my faith tested. I don't go seeking it out. Sufficient unto the day are the troubles thereof. But I feel that what karma comes to me is given to me by God, and He'll also give me the strength to get through it. That is partially affirmation, but partially years of living. But I realized at a certain point that I did not have that same faith in other people. And having lots of willpower and creativity, lots of times my so-called helpfulness was not actually being helpful. My helpfulness was the fact that I didn't think you could handle your life, so I'm going to move in and run your life for you. And that was my first response to my parents when their lives began to become very difficult because of age-related and health-related issues. I just moved in to run their life. Surprise, surprise, they didn't welcome that. I just thought they'd be so glad to just turn their life over to me. No, they weren't, actually, because I was trying to mold their life in the direction I thought their life should go. And I was not doing it out of charity. I was doing it out of convenience for myself. It was just like I didn't trust that they could take care of themselves. I thought eventually I was going to have to take care of things for them. So I just wanted to get everything organized according to my preferences. And they profoundly and totally resented it with very good cause. No, they'd run their lives quite capably. And yes, they were having some difficulties, but they knew what they were supposed to do. And even if they were wrong, it was still what they were supposed to do. Wrong in the sense that it wasn't the most efficient or the most happiness producing, but it was their karma. It was what they needed to do. And I finally had to realize, because everything got very unpleasant, I finally had to realize, why am I doing this? Who am I serving? And I had to admit I was serving myself. I was serving my convenience. And once again, I just turned it and I stood in their shoes. Yes, they were in their 80s. Yes, life was becoming, they weren't so self-sufficient. Yes, they were going to need help in all these different ways. But what were they trying to accomplish? What to them would be the natural and the appropriate next step? It certainly wasn't turning it over to their middle child. It just wasn't. They wanted their life in their way. And I had to say to myself, there may be consequences. Things may happen that will be inconvenient. They may even suffer in ways that perhaps I might have mitigated. But they need to follow their way of life. I have to see what their reality is in this. And as soon as I started trying to help them be themselves, then everything got very harmonious, and it stayed very harmonious until the end of their lives. And I was able to contribute. I was able to be helpful to them, but helpful to them in a way that strengthened them rather than diminish their own ability and their own sense of their own self-worth. And other people's realities are really sometimes quite remarkable. I remember a friend of mine, again, years ago, she was very nonlinear. She was very talented, she was very intelligent, and she was very nonlinear. I mean, even in very small things, she was nonlinear. I was staying with her once, and Swamiji was staying in her house. We were all staying there at the same time, and she was cooking breakfast. And I'm an experienced cook, and I'm quite linear when I'm doing practical things, which is I have a very clear sense of sequence and so on like that. My friend was marvelous. We were making breakfast, and these sort of random thoughts would cross her mind, like toast. And then we would work with toast for a little while, and then somehow toast would remind her that there might also be eggs. And so then we would work on eggs for a while. And we ended up, because I was just her assistant, she ended up making a lovely breakfast. And it all came out perfectly well. But when I was there trying to get her to move according to my reality, she was very feisty person. Swami used to call her, she was small. He called her my little bantam rooster, is what he called her, because she was very feisty. And she did not want me changing her life. She was quite effective in her life. It was just very different than mine. And it was so expansive for my consciousness to realize people can get even to the same goal, what to speak of other goals, by quite different means. Another friend of mine, I realized she loves process. I like results. She loves process. My way of thinking is to get to the result as quickly as you can and just forget the process, just get to it. My friend loves process. She loves getting everybody's opinion. She loves the experience of people sharing ideas. And we'll get there, just not real fast. And maybe we won't get to as many theirs in one day as I might like to get there. But this is who she is. This is her reality. And when you try to push her out of that reality and force her to live in mine, well, there's no relationship, because that's just not what she wants. And we can learn so much. There are friends in my life who are so good at things that I'm not good at. And by really entering into how it looks from their point of view and watching and learning. One such friend is not on this planet anymore, but from the astral world somewhere. when I know that she would know how to handle it. And I pray to her. And then I feel the world as she sees it, saw it, sees it. And then I know what to do even in my own life because I can embrace a reality other than my own. Whenever you're with people you know, and actually in some ways it's the most important with people you know really well, especially people you live with. Because when you live with people, as one of my friends put it, you tend to think of them as an extension of your mind rather than a completely independent, self-motivated, karmically driven entity on their own. And we gradually begin to think that we know who you are, we know what you need, we know what you want, whether it's your children, your spouse, your parents, your siblings. Do you really? This is why often lifelong relationships crack at a certain point because we've stopped appreciating who each other are. When I worked for Swamiji directly, I came over to his house every day at 4 o'clock, 5 or 6 days a week. I always arrived. I never failed to come, not once. Um, he paid me. I mean, I was his secretary, and my job was to work for him. And he paid me by opening his wallet and taking out money and handing it to me at the beginning of every month. I mean, it was a very direct relationship. I had no priority except helping him, and he was perfectly aware of that. I made no plans. I was always completely available. You'd arrive at his house at 4 in the afternoon. Maybe you'd be out the door by 4:30. Maybe it would be 1 a.m. before you left. And so I made no plans. Every time that I showed up, and with Seva or whoever else was with me, Swami would always act as if it would, he would say things like, "To what do I owe the honor of your presence? Oh, how lovely that you came over this afternoon. How kind of you to come now." Every single day. And I said to him, "I don't think you're pretending. I don't think you're just being gracious." Because he had told us, he said, "Every night before you go to sleep, give everything back to God." I said, "I feel like every night you give you give my willingness to help you, you give it completely back to God, and when I show up again, you are genuinely pleased and surprised." He said, "Yes." Just like he never imposed upon me his reality. I was always to him a complete free agent. Everything that was offered was an act of friendship, not an obligation. And it takes enormous discipline to not let your reality become the definition of other people's realities, even as willing as I was and happy. In fact, as I said, it was my whole life. But he never presumed. And that's what we get with people that we know will become presumptuous in our expectation of them. Then they can't grow and change, or they grow and change and we don't notice. And then gradually that which was harmonious and close becomes not. We the crystal clarity means to make, let me just say it exactly as Swami has written it. He said, in one's association with other people, crystal clarity means seeking always to include their realities in one's own. And in this way, much joy will be gained and much suffering will be averted. God bless you, my friends.